Hello, Lagos. Welcome to News Extra on your Beyond the News station, Radio Now 95.3 FM. I'm Stephen Imediego. Today's conversation focuses on the preservation of indigenous Nigerian languages, and these are languages that are part of Nigeria's cultural identity, and in some cases, languages that are facing increasing decline as younger generations shift to more widely spoken languages. Joining us on the conversation today is Shola Ojikutu Njoku, an author, cultural advocate, and founder of Yorubamama. First of all, I want to start by saying thank you for what you're doing to preserve Nigerian languages, because I think it's very, very important. And I would typically say, as a Nigerian, that this should be the job of the government. As a private individual, why is this important to you to preserve the Nigerian language, the indigenous Nigerian language?
I think it started off a personal note. I just personally wanted to connect to my language and culture because I'd felt isolated from it. At the time it happened, I was a mom raising young children in Berkshire, England, and there wasn't a lot of language and culture around me. And to, create my own ecosystem, I decided to teach my kids to speak fluently in Yoruba. And that's how the language work began. But of course, before this, I'd been a journalist, an arts and culture journalist at Next Newspapers prior to my relocation to the UK. So I'd begun to appreciate and value our cultural forms.
So very interesting, being in a situation where you had the need to take this step. And I do like that because it tells me that with every situation, particularly around languages, it's the people who speak the language that have the responsibility of protecting it. I want to say it's very interesting that you have both a Yoruba name and an Igbo name. Is there an attempt to help with the preservation of the Igbo language as well?
Absolutely. I am very Pan-Africanist in my work when it comes to language. I believe that all indigenous African languages must be allowed to thrive and survive in their own right. I don't think one language is necessarily superior to another language. In fact, if you go into language work as I have, you see that we've got a lot of structural similarities as well, even if our tongues are different. So I have worked in multiple languages besides Yoruba. I've worked with Igbo, creating an Igbo edition of my books. I've also worked on Yoruba. Currently, my Swahili edition is coming out in maybe about a few months now. So I do want to try and have an impact when it comes to other languages. But of course, Yoruba is my main language of focus, and it's what I speak and write with. And then I work with translators to adapt it for other languages.
Fantastic. I want to address the problem that you noted in the beginning when you started doing this. You said your location meant that there was a bit of isolation from your community, and as such, there was a need to create it by teaching your children. Is this something that you found, just spread across when it comes to the audience that participates in your trainings and your teachings, or are there other factors that have sort of forced the Nigerian indigenous languages to the background?
Well, there are many other factors. Of course, one is relocation and isolation, which is what spurred me into action because I couldn't find resources to teach my children. So I just had this epiphany moment where I thought, okay, hold on a second. I'm a writer and a journalist and I speak Yoruba fluently. Who then am I waiting for to create these resources? And so I started to do so. But besides that, we abroad would assume that in Nigeria, every child would have the opportunity to sort of just absorb it by osmosis and begin to speak it, even if the parents weren't conscientious with teaching it. But that's actually not true. Lots of Yoruba friends of mine and people who I make acquaintance with marvel at what I've managed to achieve by getting my children to speak and speak it fluently and write and read it. And they haven't done the same, even though they're in an environment where they're surrounded by these languages. So I think there are more factors at play now. People are generally in the world a bit more isolated. There's very little opportunities for cultural coalition or social coalition, that is meeting and engaging with people who speak different languages. Children are driven to school, driven back. All day they're on their phones or in their little, computers, playing games and doing other things. They don't really engage with other people. And so more and more Nigerian children are also not speaking their indigenous languages. And a lot of parents assume, oh, if I speak it with, my spouse, surely the children will pick it up. Somehow that worked in the past when children were maybe actively listening to their parents' conversations or when they would go outside and engage with friends. But now that doesn't work. If you do not deliberately teach children, they won't understand and pick up languages and speak it.
That's a very interesting position, the isolation that, young children face these days, especially because we're in an increasingly, I would say, global-facing reality at the moment. The technology that is available means that from here in the Central Business District of Lagos, I can reach out to someone in the United Kingdom, someone in China, someone in every single part of the world. So I would assume that technology makes it easier for us to be interconnected versus being isolated.
That would be the assumption, but as more and more research is finding that interconnection is of a somewhat superficial nature. And so to be properly connected, you still do need real interpersonal face-to-face conversations.
So I wonder if there is then a way that we can amplify this message and get more people to get into the face-to-face aspect of human interaction so that our languages don't die. Instead, they become bigger, I guess as big as any of the other things that I've seen on screen. And I'll get to that in just a moment.
And yes, of course, our languages can be bigger. We just need to use it. I have this thing where I'm constantly saying that English does not equate to literacy. There are people who are literate in Yoruba or literate in other languages, and those people are sort of sidelined. I also do tell anyone that would care to listen that if you don't teach your children your language to speaking proficiency, not understanding, because most parents will say, oh, my children understand, and so I think I'm fine. No, you are not fine, because if you don't teach your children a language to speaking proficiency, they then cannot use it and pass it on to their children. So it stops there in your family, in your lineage. And I think that's a stark realization that many parents need to wake up to. And also, if you as a maybe young person, you haven't been taught Yoruba or any of the other languages, you can then take it upon yourself to teach yourself, find tuition with people like me. I teach, while also creating digital content on platforms and my books. I'm trying now to adapt my resources to the ways in which people are currently consuming information, which is, of course, a lot of digital content. And I'm hoping that way the message gets passed on. But I think, first of all, it's that realization we need to have. One, that the fear of language death or extinction is very real. And in another 50 years, say, when many of the Yoruba and other native speakers have become old and maybe begun to pass away, what is left in this current in their own children have we put enough language knowledge in there to help the languages, continue to thrive going forward. So I think the realization does need to come, and ideally it should come from places like the government and other information ministries, places like that, but that's not happening yet. So we as regular, just language using people need to wake up to the reality of that.
So one thing I have noted is that with languages, there are different ways of transmitting them. I'm somebody who started picking up Japanese by watching anime, and I still do that till today while trying to learn other languages at the same time. But I found that film and the visual aspect is a good way to transmit that knowledge. Unfortunately, the more popular films these days are done in the English language, even when they include stories of mythology from other cultures. Is Nigeria ignoring this? Is Hollywood, I beg your pardon, is Nollywood ignoring this opportunity to, one, tell great stories, tell our stories, and help the spread of our languages?
I think that can be sort of reflected on a case-by-case basis. I do think personally that the Yoruba movie industry has always tried a bit more in making sure that there are Yoruba movies produced in the language. More and more epic movies are coming up, historical films where we are seeing the use of those languages. But that's, again, we have to then also assess if that's an entry point for, say, young people or new language learners who have not had any interaction with the language. So there needs to be a plethora of different forms for it to actually have an impact. And of course, I would encourage Nollywood and, its other many industries in there to do better when it comes to language and culture use, and also the ways in which they reflect it. Because if it's reflected in a negative light, people are pushed away from it. They will not want to engage. But so we do need to bring out the best of our culture and our languages using the media that we do have.
Ma'am, I'd like to thank you very much for taking the time to speak with us today on News Extra. Lagos, Nigeria, our guest, Shola Ojikutu Njoku, is an author, a cultural advocate, and the founder of Yorubamama. She's very passionate about preserving Nigerian indigenous language, and she does that by teaching and offering trainings across the world. You're still listening to Radio Now 95.3 FM Lagos. That's News Extra. In a few short moments, the conversation will turn to the front pages of the dailies on the News Review. I'm Stephen Imediegu, urging you to stay with us.